What's going on, everybody? This is Chris K from the Bet on C2C podcast. Life has come on the way, and unfortunately, not able to do a podcast here this week. So, next 2 days, today and tomorrow, I'm going to do a quick action discussion to help you guys out and make up for it. So, what we're looking at here is today's, or I should say tonight's, Tuesday, November 1st, is slate 2 games of action, which is fairly typical, right? Ball State and Kent State against Buffalo and Ohio. We are treated with 2 great matchups. I mean, some of the, if you listen to the Burning the Redshirt podcast, I mean, we're all about Kent State. We love Ohio. So these are great teams to start with. Nice thing about it is they're pretty equal in terms of totals. Both are around 60 with 62 for this first one here. Ball State, Kent State, and then 59, I think it is, for the Ohio game. And both of them are going to be tight. So action always going to create crazy stuff. But, hey, we have kind of like an even playing field to begin with. Now we have to worry about just the actual players actually playing. So wanted to just literally get into it and look at the options and briefly touch on what we're expecting here. So quarterback is going to be pretty simple, I think. If Schlee, the injuries here are Colin Schlee and some other guys, which I'll talk about as we go through the positions, but Schlee's really our only injury concern here. And it's a big one. I mean, the nice thing is they priced Cardman and his backup at fairly even in terms of pricing. Whatever guy is starting is the guy you're going to want. It's the first game, we should know. So I would consider Schlee. I don't see how Kent State would be a favorite by a touchdown if he wasn't playing. So Schlee's going to be a top option. And I mean, let's look at the data, right? Like 10 plus carries, rushing touchdowns, games of 398 passing against Ohio. Just super efficient against Long Island. He looked honestly pretty decent against Georgia, and they really kept him like kind of conservative play calling there. So really interested in Schlee, and I consider him really the top quarterback. But the absolute zero risk guy here is going to be Curtis Rourke, right? You see his game logs, really good stuff. His rushing usage is a little limited, but his efficiency is insane, right? Like 9 yards, 8 yards per carry, touchdown. So you see a good bit of usage there, generally speaking, but it's more efficiency, right? 3 touchdowns on 27 passes. So these are going to be your top 2 quarterbacks. One thing I'll say about this slate is you can pretty much do whatever you want, and you're going to have enough salary cap for it. So along the way, I'll maybe mention a guy or two that you're going to have to vary if you're going to try to win a tournament, right? If you win the tournament with the typical stuff, you're going to share it with 15 other people, which could be fairly common in action if we don't get any crazy stuff. But looking at other options here, Cole Snyder, Buffalo doesn't really do the old run-only thing anymore, which is interesting because Cal Van Treese went to Georgia Southern, and now he passes a ton. Cole Snyder is here at Buffalo, and now they're passing a pretty decent bit. So it's interesting how that shook out, but he's a good option as well, right? We've seen Ohio play defense, and it's really just nothing. I would consider Cole Snyder a really good option, a little bit more expensive than Rourke, so maybe people will avoid him, but I think you have to strongly consider him as well. And then the fourth option here is going to be John Paddock. Do I love this play? Not really. I mean, look at his game log, started off strong, has kind of struggled, right? I think that also goes in line with Carson Steele just going crazy at running back. But if it's up to me, I think your cash game options are going to be Schlee and Rourke. I think Snyder's a little bit sneakier because he still has kind of those Rourke numbers in a sense without like that Rourke name. Looking at running backs, I mentioned Carson Steele, probably the top option here. I mean, insane usage, great receiving numbers, 9 total touchdowns, games of 3 touchdowns, right? In action, what we see is the crazy 70 fantasy point performances a la Jarrett Patterson maybe a few years back, but consistency here. I don't really know how you can fade them. Kent State's not the best defense, and honestly, they just go so fast that you're going to get a high-scoring game here. Love him. Sia Bangura is an interesting guy because all of a sudden his usage has dropped, right? So if you look at, I believe it's McCormick here, Nolan McCormick, he had more carries in him last game, 14-10. My buddy Bainbridge shared a video in his Discord about their head coach basically saying, look, like Bangura is banged up, but we had the extra week off. We'll see how he's feeling. This feels like a sneaky, all of a sudden he doesn't play. I'm not saying avoid him. I'm just saying be very careful. Pay attention to the team warm-ups and stuff like that for sure. But assuming he does plays, he does get a bit of usage everywhere, right? Ohio doesn't play defense, like I said. We could see a good high-scoring matchup here. So Bangura is good. If he does not play, or if we think that he's limited, it's Nolan McCormick. Cheaper option at 4,500. Not the most, good running backs of the period. I can't even formulate a decent sentence. He's that average. But it's Maction. He's cheap. We get a RB1 potentially. And it's a nice pivot. I think Bangura is going to be highly owned, and we see a pivot here with McCormick. Other options. So Buffalo, Ron Cook, I guess, is the guy, but they seem to use a little bit of everybody. I'm going to pull up their last game on the side here, but they use Alj Henderson, I believe, a little bit, and they use Washington a little bit. I probably want to avoid this situation completely, but I had mentioned earlier, you kind of need to get a little bit risky to win a tournament if you're using multiple lineups. So if you look at last game, he had Ron Cook at 18 carries, Washington had 10, Alj Henderson had 1. Look at the game before that. I'm going to pull it up. You're not watching, of course. 34-7 against UMass. We saw 11 for Cook, 14 for Washington, 5 for Henderson. Now, I like to look at maybe the last competitive game because UMass 34-7, you could get some info that's not really going to be the best because it was such a blowout. Ron Cook, 15 carries against Miami, maybe a month ago. Mike Washington, 11. So this isn't going to be like your RB1, RB2. This kind of almost feels like a 1A, 1B. You know what happens when we get a 1A, 1B? There's a possibility for that B to have a huge game, and that's going to be that Mike Washington here. Like I'd mentioned, he's had good games. Bowling Green, great game. Eastern Michigan, really good game, even though it was rough. Worth considering, and I think if you want to pivot, that's another option, right? I don't think you need to pivot altogether at once. I wouldn't go Washington and McCormick in the same lineups necessarily if you're playing only a few, but it would be worth considering each of those separately. Marquez Cooper, probably one of my favorite options here. I mean, look at the carry numbers, right? We're in week 10 at this point. So thing I worry about is a guy going to see a ton of carries and all of a sudden he sees a limited amount of carries because they're trying to save his legs for a week, right? Maybe it's a different matchup in a week they need that. Cooper's maybe needed more for that next game. I mean, severely mispriced. 40 carries. He had the limited 13 carries, but then 31, 28 with the off week, and now they're back. I think we could see a huge dosage of him. Kent State loves to go super fast. We could get 8 carries on a drive, right? And you see a lot of really good games here. Played well against Georgia. Limited receiving action here, but a ton of rushing usage and some rushing touchdowns. I think he's even better of a play if Schley doesn't play. I think that you could see Cargman at quarterback. Let's say that happens. Cooper might see a 40 carry game because they want to lean on him a little bit more. Other options. I mean, Ball State, Will Jones, not really a thing anymore. He kind of was back and forth last year. We talked about Carson Steele. Really, those are going to be your top guys. If you want to get a little tricky, what about Brian Bradford? Okay, this is a little tricky. This is the situation where we don't see a heavy lift for Cooper. Bradford's that RB2. What does he do? I mean, he's been very effective when is getting snaps. Just another running back that could get caught up in a really up-tempo offense on a drive and gets the touchdown. Or you see Cooper, long drive, Cooper starts it. They put in Bradford at the goal line. I think Bradford could be in consideration there at the end for some sprinkle of tournament plays. Now, receiver is where it gets a little tricky, right? Cephas is hurt for Kent State. It seems like he's back. I don't see with Schley, right? I don't see Kent State as a touchdown favorite if Cephas is hurt. It's possible. But I think he's a really good option. He commands a ton of targets. I'll put it up on the side here. so you'll miss it. But looking at Kent State, he has seen targets of 16, 16, 11. And then last week or last game was 5. I believe that was the game he got hurt mid-game. 35% of team targets. Other guy in this offense that you'll have to consider is Devontae Walker. I think he's much safer because there's no injury tag and his upside's insane if Cephas is out. So he got 3 touchdowns last game against Akron, but before that has seen a ton of usage and ton of targets. So his last 5 games are 9, 7, 16, 8, and 9 targets. And you see a sprinkle of rushing usage. And I don't really care about that. It's nice, but I'm not relying or trust or banking on that for it. Big play guy, but that's what these receivers are in this offense. To round out Kent State's passing game, I think Jason Poke, I've always said Poke, but I think someone said Poke once, so we'll go with that. I think he's a great option to consider. He's always been that guy that's kind of been on like the tip of like huge upside, big potential, and he just never has done it. He was hurt to start the year, 4 targets in week 7, 3 in week 8. So not a ton of usage, but if Cephas doesn't play, Poke is going to get a ton of usage here potentially. And he's a big play threat, like huge big play threat, right? 3 for 57, 2 for 51. Literally all it takes is a max and slate. He ends with 3 for 120 and a touchdown, and he's going to be in every winning lineup essentially, right? Looking at other teams, Deshaun Jackson is a great play, top receiver for Ball State. They're passing it enough. They're passing enough to make it a thing, right? And I don't think you just look at Carson Steele there and call it a day. But I think if you're using Paddock, you have to use Jay Sean. There's injury concerns with Johannes Taylor. So if we pull up, or Johannes Tyler, he doesn't have the best of numbers. Worth considering because anything can happen, but he's also potentially out. We're going to have to see in pregame warmups what's the situation here. Ball State really has relied on him and Jackson, as well as two tight ends, which are Koziel and Brady Hunt. So Brady Hunt really is that tight end 1 for them. Koziel is that tight end 2. He mysteriously had less snaps. I mean, I think there's some fluctuation. Nate in our Slack channel has kind of discussed how like he thinks really it's just he's not really hurt. It's more of like it's a high risk, high reward situation where he might get a bunch of snaps, but really Brady Hunt's going to be that top guy. I think he's a nice play, right? I don't think a lot of people love playing tight ends because like the upside can be limited. And for the most part, like there's just not a lot of great at tight ends in fantasy, in college fantasy football. 3 tight ends, touchdowns last 4. But what if Koziel is hurt, right? This is what the production they're missing and that Brady Hunt could potentially fulfill. What if Tyler's hurt? Do we see more 2 tight end sets? Huge for Koziel in that situation. Both of them super cheap. So you see a lot of different situations here. And I'll talk at the end maybe about a little bit about what I would consider overarching ideas for the slate. But he's been pretty good. Looking at Buffalo, because they are passing more, right? You get Quinn Williams. I think what was he at? Eastern Michigan or Ohio, one of the green teams. They all kind of run together at a certain point. He's been decent. You got to wonder, do people look at his game log and say, well, he hasn't really done anything like for a while, great start, whatever. But like against UMass, he did basically nothing, right? So he could be a great tournament play against Ohio. I'm going to probably see a decent bit of him just because that total is going to be high enough and he's a receiver 1. Justin Marshall, I don't know, doesn't really do anything for me, but same situation, I guess, right? Some really good games, but then nothings, right? So these are guys I'm not banking on a ton. An overarching idea for action is never go all in on a guy. I think there's situations where like a Jarrett Patterson where you do 90% of them in your lineups, but there's just so much crazy stuff that can happen as we've seen the last couple of weeks in college football that I think you just can't bank on one. So Ohio receivers are going to be a hot item, starting with same Wiggles. I think people want to call him Wiggles, but I don't think that's it. But great option. Good enough price. He's, like I said earlier, salary cap is fine, not a big deal. And then we see the production, right? 6, 8, 7, 6, 10 catches. I believe that Western Michigan was on the main slate. He played pretty well. So these are things that I'm considering. Looking at other options from them, Jacoby Jones, he's a big play guy for them. I don't know. I think you have to roster somebody, right? So this could be a nice pivot off of Wigless. Miles Cross doesn't really do it for me. You just fairly decent, consistent. But if I'm playing tournaments, this isn't going to cut it for me. Would have to be considered a pivot option or like a game stack option. Then the other guy would be Tyler Walton. Limited usage. I think he's back. I want to say he got a target in week 8, just didn't really produce. RotoWire doesn't really give you all the data sometimes. They just have some guys missing. I would confirm that he's playing, but he would be that like receiver 4 in a really good offense. Believe that's everybody here on the slate. If I'm looking at everybody overarching, right, I think this is going to be your basic lineup everywhere. It's going to be Schlee. It's going to be Rourke. You're going to get Carson Steele. You're going to get, let's say, Cooper. It's just going to be really hard not to play a ton of Kent State guys. So let's instead go Sia Bangura with Cephas, Walker. Let's see, where's Wigless? There's Wigless. And then, you could go Cooper. You could go Marshall to go with a Buffalo play, counterpoint to that Ohio option. So as you can see, pretty easy to get whoever you want, right? Who are we missing in this scenario? Ron Cook, who's in a kind of a committee. We're missing Ja'Shawn Jackson. So we do miss him here, but what if we just did that, right? Then we could get Cooper, right? I wouldn't worry about too many Kent State guys. I wouldn't worry about, just kind of not even having one Buffalo player. I think in Maction, anything can happen. So this is going to be your basic duplicated lineup. What if we wanted to pivot? How would we do that, right? Take away Cephas, add Poke to get fancy with it. Leave money on the table. I think you're going to have to leave money on the table tonight. It's possible using the whole salary is going to do it, but you're probably duplicated. A lot of let's say I play 3 or 4 lineups in the big tournament. I'm going to be looking for at least 1,000 to 1,500 left on the table because I'm not trying to duplicate if I'm only doing 3 or 4 lineups. So that's kind of what I'm looking at here. Like I said, Quinn Williams and an offense has been producing. Keep an eye on the Ball State receiver, tight end situation for Tyler and Koziel in terms of their health. Keep an eye on Cephas and Schlee for Kent State and their health. If you're not going to be around 7 when it locks, I would just make one lineup and walk away or not play at all because it's going to be really tough with injuries to put together a lineup that's going to be great and not risk a 0. So just some thoughts. Hope you guys enjoy the slate. Coming back probably tomorrow. I should say it will be coming back tomorrow for it. So hope everybody has fun, enjoys the first Maction slate, and have a good one.